Hello everybody, I'm Zenith Rule, and I'm here with my good friend Y2Staller.
Hello everybody.
And we are here to talk to you about a film, as usual. And it's a very different film. Do you want to introduce them to this film, Eric?
It's 1773. The American Revolution is starting to brew. The British are coming in with all these acts, the Stamp Acts, Townshend Acts, Tea Acts, and all of a sudden, the tension, the oppression of the people keep building up, until eventually the yearn for freedom cries out. And what do we get? We get Johnny Tremain.
Johnny Tremain is a film that baffles me. Now, I've seen many Disney films, but this is perhaps the worst in many different senses. It does get some things right, but at the same time, I just found myself laughing at it because it's so bad it's good.
Yeah, it is definitely one of those movies where it is where it is so bad it's good, but I wouldn't say it's like really, really bad. I feel like I've seen a lot worse Disney films. I mean, I don't think it's bad as, say, Inspector Gadget, but
yes, it's not as bad as Inspector Gadget. I will give it that.
But that's a story for another time.
But comparing it to the films that we've talked previously about on the past Disney debate, I think it's definitely worse than The Reluctant Dragon. The Reluctant Dragon was really bad because it was basically an ad for Disney in the disguise of a movie, and a lot of it was really ridiculous. And the thing that really angered me about it was the Reluctant Dragon cartoon and that one character. Here, it's very different. I'd say it's definitely worse than Cinderella 2, because say what you will about Cinderella 2, it had structure. It had 3 stories that it wanted to tell. This movie has a lot. So Dear to My Heart is another bad one we've talked about. That movie was just boring. And this, I really want to say, is a little bit more boring in many senses. But we'll get to why in a second. So Johnny Tremain is the story of a boy who grew up during the time of the Revolutionary War. And the film is basically a build-up to the Revolutionary War. It's a lot of the events that took place before the war, and the film ends right when the shot heard round the world happens. So it's very much the first problem I have with that, and I love history. I'm a huge fan of Revolutionary War history, but I prefer a film that would actually cover the events of the war. Where this feels like there's so much buildup and so much tension that they're trying to put into it, and it really doesn't end, or it really doesn't build to anything.
The real problem with Johnny Tremain is that it's basically structured kind of like the previous historical movies that Disney has done. For example, with Davy Crockett, that movie is kind of structured as three separate stories. The same thing can be said with Westward Ho! The Wagons, where that was essentially like 3 separate stories. Here, Johnny Tremain is more like 2 separate stories. It's broken up really into like 2 segments. The first one is the build-up, is everything leading up to the Boston Tea Party. And the second part is everything leading up to the shot heard around the world, which is the beginning of the Battle of Lexington and Concord. So once again, so here they're still trying to do like that Davy Crockett thing where they're doing history, but they're breaking it up into two parts. But it's done deliberately because then later, of course, they do show it on television, like, and they show it on TV in two parts. So that's pretty much the reason why it's kind of structured that way. But when you see it as a whole, as one giant film, I mean, I guess you kind of could see it as a 3-act structure, but to me it still kind of feels like it's like two separate movies in one.
For me, it felt like a bunch of different films, and I mean, I'll give the film credit. I couldn't tell where one part began and another part ended. In Westward Ho, there's a very definite, okay, here's where this part begins and ends. You could tell. It was structured a lot like Davy Crockett, where they had these, like... they didn't have the in-between songs, like the jingles of Davy Crockett, but Westward Ho had very clear markers. Here, I really couldn't pick it apart, but that's because there's so many plot points, and there's so many things happening.
Actually, well, the thing is that it's kind of like what you mentioned before. It's... when one plot point starts, but then it resolves again resolves again only in a span of like a few minutes. For example, when Johnny Tremain burns his hand and finds out that his hand has been fused together and he can't really work as a silversmith anymore, he then goes out to try to see if he can find work, and he gets rejected everywhere he goes. All leading up to then eventually him taking the cup that he had from Mr. Light, who apparently is his relative, who he's related to, and then goes to him to try to get help. That gets resolved, but then it immediately jumps into him being arrested, saying that he was accused of stealing his cup, and that goes into another thing. That goes into the trial, which then that gets resolved in a few minutes, and then goes into another thing with him with the Sons of Liberty. It just goes from one to the next, to the next, to the next. It doesn't really it doesn't have a sense of flow. It just kind of just goes from one thing to the next, and it just goes by really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm. It's a pacing problem, and now I have never read the book Johnny Tremain. This is based off a children's book. But from the way it's structured, I mean, I don't know if it's changed from the book or not, but it feels like chapters are just squeezed together. Like there must have been a chapter on the trial, but the trial ends in like 5 minutes. It's a non-issue. He's put on trial for theft, and then all of a sudden, his lawyer convinces the judge to stay the trial. His lawyer and his childhood sweetheart convince the judge that there isn't a case. And this is the thing where I don't think trials were this fast back then.
I don't think so either, but also they don't have like forensic evidence and stuff like that to verify all this stuff. It's back in a time where you can where with trials you don't need to present like actual things, like hard evidence to prove that he actually did commit this. It's just the whole he said, she said, and apparently because by some faith that she is speaking the truth and therefore has no reason to lie. So of course Johnny Tremain is innocent.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where these things are resolved so quickly. And speaking of the fact that he burned his hand and he could never find work, his hand is healed by a doctor later in the film. I'm pretty sure that days. Let's give the film a little bit of. Let's give the film the benefit of the doubt and say it was only days after he burned his hand. He burned it on hot silver. A surgeon isn't going to be able to fix it up good as new in a few days.
Yeah, I mean, but then again, we don't really get a sense of how much time has elapsed between that. So, I mean, it could be like several weeks later or stuff or something like that. So, and I mean, that's the way it is with this movie. There's a time elapse, but everything goes by so quickly. So, I guess, I mean, we're supposed to assume that it's been like weeks or even months later when, this sort of when each of these events happen.
And if it is weeks or months later, that makes it even more implausible to me for the very simple fact that burns, even after taking a long time to heal, scar. Like, if you don't treat it immediately, and he didn't, they showcase when he reveals the burn, he didn't treat it immediately. Unless you do that, you get scars, you get, I mean, with the technology and medical tech that they had back then, they couldn't skin graft. So I don't think that they would be able to get his hand back to normal in that amount of time.
But at the same time, from a filmmaking standpoint and what the idea of how films were presented in the 1950s is that they were still under the code. They were still under that code of like certain things that you can't show on screen, and being that we're still in the 1950s, that I don't think they were able to show like hand deformities. I mean, when we see him with the bandage and when he actually takes it off, that we don't see the actual deformity of his hand. I mean, we just know that his hand is fused together, but you don't. But they're not going to show any of like the grotesque stuff of his hand being like fused together from hot silver and all the burns that's on it. I mean, they're not going to show us that, and also because it's Disney. So from that standpoint, I mean, yeah, it's unrealistic, but at the same time, they wouldn't be able to show it.
The big issue I take with it, and I understand why they couldn't show it. I understand why, you can pretty clearly see that his hand has been painted red. And I understand why because of the code, but it just seems to me a very big plot point that they just throw away. It's like, if they had kept with, okay, if they had kept with the fact that he only had one usable hand throughout the film, I think it would have made it a bit better because just take out the trial in general, have him go around taken in by the Sons of Liberty, and he can still fire with one hand. So they use him as a tool for the Sons of Liberty. And that would explain why he's so loyal to them that he turns down the prospect of riches later in the film. A lot of this just feels... a lot of the film just feels disjointed about the character of Johnny Tremain. And that's like the main thing where Johnny Tremain as a character does not make sense to me. Throughout the entire film, he's just like, I don't want riches. I don't want to, be that type of person. I just want to, make life better for myself with my own hands. And I can support that. But the whole time, his sweetheart is just like, you're a fool, Johnny Tremain. You're a complete fool. You should be a rich person. And then he burns his hand. He has nothing, and he goes to Mr. Light because he's like, okay, well, this is the only way I can do this. So he's completely going against all his principles. But then later on in the film, when he's offered by Mr. Light to be rich, he's like, no, Sons of Liberty, I don't want to be rich anymore.
The one thing I don't get is that after his hand gets deformed and when he's at the Boston Tea Party and he's talking to the doctor and he's like, oh, I'm like, we've said this before. You can I can help you, help your hand. Like I could fix your hand. And yet Johnny Tremain refuses. Like he's refused before. And it's like, wait, he's giving you an opportunity to fix your hand and you're just saying no. And plus, if there was a way to fix his hand to begin with, Why didn't they do this earlier?
Yeah, it would have saved a lot of the plot points of the film. It's just this character flip-flops. This character says one thing, does another thing. And then he's supposedly standing by his principles of doing everything the way he wants to do it by himself and turning down help at any turn, and then he gets help at random.
But then there's also, he also kind of doesn't follow logic either, like when he says that he actually wanted to go to, he wants to go to Lexington, to help fight against, to fight against the British, and he's like, and he's just like, well, but his girlfriend is like, no, it's like, wait a minute, but you don't know how to fire a gun, I'll get one, I'll learn how, but where are you going to get one? It's like, I'll get one from one of the British, and it's just like, you're basically, so wait a minute, you going up there to fight, you don't have a gun,
you don't know how to fire a gun, and the whole time I'm just like, you're so dumb, Johnny Tremain. Like, she says every possible thing that can go wrong, you're going to get yourself killed. No, I won't get shot at, I'll just stand behind the other people of the line. What?
But the other people of the line, when they die, will eventually shoot you. Because, I'm not an expert in Revolutionary Warfare, but I do sort of have experience with it, because about 2 years ago at MagFest, during the Nerf War, we actually did, like, a revolutionary-style wars thing, and, being the overly excited man that I am, I stood right in the front of the line. And even though this was this type of warfare back in the 1700s, it's pretty intimidating. War is war, and if you're in the front of the line, you're gonna go down first, and eventually they're gonna get to everyone else. So that strategy is only going to take you so far.
Mm-hmm. You're standing in a straight line against two opposing factions. Someone is going to die. The people in the front are definitely going to die. You're standing behind the people at the beginning of the line. You're next.
Mm-hmm.
And we see where he stands in the line. I'm going to put it on screen right here. See? That's him. His head is clearly in view. One shot, bam, you're dead. You didn't bring a gun, you don't know how to fire a gun, so even if you picked a gun off a fallen soldier, you're not going to know how to fire it. You've never done it before. And I still don't understand why he even is involved in the Sons of Liberty cause in the first place. His best friend's father runs a newspaper, and he's part of the Sons of Liberty. I get that. That's how he learns about the Sons of Liberty. His best friend and his father get him out of jail and give him a lawyer to help him out in his time of need. I get that. And I would be very grateful for my friend, too. And that's when they introduce him to the Sons of Liberty and everything. But he doesn't understand the politics. He's always said, I stay out of politics. And you can clearly see that he doesn't understand what he's doing. He doesn't understand what he's doing here. He doesn't understand what the Sons of Liberty is trying to do. And for the most part, he's just a bystander watching. But for some reason, at the end of the film, he does everything in his power to join the Sons of Liberty on the front lines. And yes, I do get that he had been busted out of jail by the Sons of Liberty, and they clearly said the Sons of Liberty will always stand by a friend.
Because when you're a jet all the way, from your first cigarette to your last dying day. And that sort of thing. Well, because the guy who plays Rab would later be Tony in West Side Story, so I had to do that.
His best friend is Tony in West Side Story. But seriously, I don't get why he's so gung-ho about it. Compare this to a similar film, The Patriot. In The Patriot, this guy just wants to stay out of the Revolutionary War. And he's, even after one of his sons dies, he's still hesitant to go to war. He loses another son. Okay, that's the straw. Now he's fighting on the front lines. I get that. I get that motivation. For Johnny, I can get him helping the Sons of Liberty. I can get him wanting to go to the Boston Tea Party, which, at first I was a little bit iffy about because I didn't know that historically kids were at the Boston Tea Party, but they apparently were. I cannot understand why he would sacrifice everything to go to the front lines of a battle that he knew he was going to lose.
Well, wouldn't say lose, but I think what the real problem with this movie is that they talk about liberty, they talk about principles, but they never really talk about what liberty really is. Like, they never really go that far. They just say, liberty, it's important, and you have to stand on your principles, and because tyranny is bad and liberty is good, and that's pretty much it. They really don't go that much further than that, and that's what I find kind of confusing, and in some ways kind of understand why Johnny would do this sort of thing, because it's like, oh, liberty, it's cool because we could do what we want, but it's a little bit more than that, and the movie doesn't really address it that much.
It's a lot like Liberty's Kids, where they address historical points, and they're technically historically accurate, but at the same time, they don't delve too much into it. They don't teach us enough about it. And you really don't get the motivations of the main characters. I could understand his best friend being a son of liberty because his father is. His father brought him up to be that way. But Johnny Tremain has no reason to want to join. And then when the Sons of Liberty, after the Tea Party, they're walking down the square, his childhood sweetheart and a bunch of little kids and girls start marching with them and start singing about how liberty is awesome and how together they can be liberty. Just, you kids do not understand what you're doing. And I know that historically back then, the kids were treated like adults because it was a very tough time. But, I just don't feel realism in this.
I don't think they were really playing for realism. I mean, I've seen other American Revolutionary War movies that are more real, that show a little bit more realism. I think there was one movie called April Morning. I remember it being I remember Tommy Lee Jones being in it, and that was actually pretty interesting because it does the Battle of Lexington and the first shots being fired in that battle, and Tommy Lee Jones, his character, he dies immediately, and his son is it's about the son, but he also understands the cost of the real cost of freedom, the real cost of liberty, of what it means, to actually, fight against what at the time was the greatest musket men on earth. And with Johnny Tremain, it's more of a, the whole, liberty good, tyranny bad. That's pretty much what it is. And they don't go any further than that, and because it's Disney. So,
and this film would be 10 times better if they just focused on the adults. If Johnny Tremain had been one of the adults there, because everything that takes place in this film with the adults who run the Sons of Liberty is actually really well acted and surprisingly well thought out. They talk about historical stuff. The characters, like I said, are well acted compared to the child actors who, let's face it, this film feels like if you take Danny from Westward Ho and you gave him a starring role in a film, and I know it's not the same actor, but these guys can't act. These children.
Oh, Master Tremain! Can I take your bag, sir?
Well, who is we?
Sons of Liberty.
But who are you?
Everyone in Boston who believes their liberties are worth fighting for.
You can keep your politics. I'll stick to my trade and mind my own business.
Johnny, I don't want you to go off like this.
Goodbye, Scylla.
But at least stay until you can find something. You're a stubborn fool, Johnny Tremain.
Johnny Tremain, and I thought about this, Johnny Tremain kind of reminds me of... He kind of reminds me a little bit of Burt Ward from Batman, you know, the 1960s Batman. I know this hasn't been around. It didn't come out. I know it didn't come out yet, but that's what the acting style kind of reminded me of. That, you know, gee whiz, jolly, gee whiz, zippity doo, Batman. You know, that kind of thing. That's what.
Holy spinny tops of doom, Batman! We're gonna talk like people never talk in their lives.
The Joker is attacking the church. Holy Sunday, Batman. But that's what it reminded me of, and I think that's why I kind of tolerate, if that's the right way to describe this, the acting, because I'm so used to watching a lot of like campy stuff, and I mean, I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think that's pretty much what that style of acting was at the time. Like, it wasn't so much, you know, trying to go for realism, but just, you know, as long as you have like the spirit or whatever of the character, you can really deliver this role. So that's why I think I like the acting doesn't really anger me as much as, say, you did, but
I wouldn't say it makes me angry so much as I just find it hilarious, and I think it clashes with what the film is trying to do.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, like I said, you have the child actors who are caught up in the historical drama, and they're hilarious. On the other side, you have these serious adult figures who are really good at acting, who know what they're doing, and they're trying to tell you something. And, you know, you have Mr. Light, who as a character is one of the best in the film. And he's an evil British guy, and he's showing you how even when Johnny tries to do something nice, the British guy's a dick. Like, he gives him back the cup, and he says, "I'm really your son," and the British guy immediately throws him in jail. I can believe that of a British guy. And, you know, historically, I bet British people would do that. And then there's another adult figure who I think is the best character in the film, and he's only in one scene. This guy he's the guy who created the Sons of Liberty. He said he's the founder of the council, and I forget what they said his name was.
James Otis. I'm actually looking at it right now. And I like his character very much. Like, he's only in, I think he's in, 2 scenes. And I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I really wanted to talk about this. There's a scene where James Otis arrives at what is assumed to be, one of the last meetings of the Sons of Liberty. And he goes upstairs, and he addresses everyone, and, he gets brought down in his, rightful seat, and he talks about, pretty much what the future will bring to the Sons of Liberty, what it will mean to the colonies. And he says, if at some point, with this standoff at Lexington, that somehow we do end up going to war, we got to be fighting for something. We got to be fighting something, something more than just high taxes, or just trying to get the British out of the colonies. Something a little bit more deeper than that. And Johnny Tremain says, the liberty of men, and he goes on to say, why stop there? why just the liberty of Englishmen? Why not the liberty of, of all men around the world? So he has a much more bigger picture, a much more bigger idea, and I like that scene, and the way he addresses it is a real pivotal point in the movie, and probably the best scene in the entire film.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say that was when I knew this film was, this is a term coined by Count Jacula. It's called gooder. It's when a film that's, has a lot of bad parts to it, but it has one component that takes it from bad to really, really good. This is that scene. And when I first saw it, I'm just like, whoa, I want to see a film about this guy. Because, like you said, he says this big speech about how liberty isn't just about men, it's about women of all races and all creeds. We're fighting for liberty, and he actually defines what liberty is for once in the film. And if they had gone further like he did here, this might have been a better film. And the whole point of him too was he was getting old. He hit his head in an accident, and people were saying that he wasn't in the right state of mind. And we see him, and I think the reason why they said that was because he was saying some radical ideas. Ideas that people back then weren't used to. The idea of equality, the idea of every man, just every man being able to be equal with another man or woman. And he's saying this in front of them. And I thought to myself, this guy is ahead of his time. And people like this were what made up the Founding Fathers. This is why Revolutionary War intrigues me so much, is because these people had such a radical mindset for their time. And they were saying things that even today we take for granted about equality and liberty for everyone. And in this scene just captures that.
Yeah, it does it does a really good job for what it is. There's scenes like that in like other movies, like especially in say like 1776, the movie version. It's based off of a Broadway play, but the movie version does like what that one scene in Johnny Tremain does, but expands a little bit more on that. But that's an entirely different podcast whatsoever. But but I like that scene. But I like that scene very much, and it captures what it is that what it is that they want to fight for. Yes, they could have gone a little bit further, but it's a nice moment in the film.
Mm-hmm. This shows to me that this film has potential. If the film didn't have this scene, it would probably be lower than Inspector Gadget on my list. But with this scene bringing back what this film had the potential for, I can kind of see what they were trying to go with it. And with the stuff with the adults, I can actually see, okay, Disney had a sort of vision. It didn't pan out for the film, but it works when it works.
Yeah, it does. And even when he actually comes back later, he actually comes back at the very end of the film, and and they're saying like, oh, so glad it's over, and he's like, over? This has only just begun. And yeah, historically we know it's only just begun, but yeah, that's what it is. It's the beginning of a revolution.
Mm-hmm. And if the film had ended there with his scene, I actually think it might have been better, because we have this whole Lexington and Concord scene where we have the shooting and kind of inappropriate happy music. In the film, Disney uses a lot of their stock music from past films, and during a lot of the fights and like the Boston Tea Party, the music seems very out of place. But after Lexington and Concord and the whole battle, we get the scene that sets this movie back 2 pegs. It's like, I started giving the film leeway because, while it was kind of bad up until that point, that scene showed it had potential. And then the ending happened, and we see the British officers' camp. Like, this is a British camp, and they're looking at Boston, and Boston is ablaze with people gathering together in their victory. And the British officer is saying, okay, they're going to come back with more and more men. Tens and thousands are going to come back from Boston. We've already lost this battle. We've lost due to a basic influence, we've lost due to a basic impulse of human decency, I believe was the line.
No, it was, I think it was like the basis of human rights, I think, something like that.
You see those campfires, gentlemen? Yesterday we ruled over Boston. Tonight we are besieged in it. And still they come from every village and farm. Tonight 10,000, tomorrow perhaps twice 10,000. We've experienced more than a defeat, more than a mere misfortune of war. We have been vanquished by an idea, a belief in human rights.
1. This is the beginning of the war. This is what started a war. How the hell do you know that you've lost? How is that a loss of a war at that one moment? How in the hell are you giving up in that time? You outnumber them like 50-1. Even if you have everybody in Boston, you are trained soldiers. You have the confidence, and we've seen this earlier in the film, you know you can beat them. Granted, you don't know about the guerrilla warfare tactics that they're going to use, but you should be confident. But even still, you're a goddamn British officer. British officers would never say something like that because they believe they're right.
Well, yeah, and I do agree with you on the fact it's like, oh, we lost because of human rights, and it's like, no, you lost because you were strategically outmaneuvered, because we see it, because before that scene we go through like a montage of British troops in retreating back to Boston, and all of a sudden you see the militia, you see the Minutemen coming up and just picking them off from like behind bushes and like across riverbanks, and like they're just like, and there's like one scene where they're marching, one guy gets shot, they fall down, but they continue marching, like they don't even acknowledge that he's like, oh, somebody died. Oh, never mind.
Well, that's because they're trained soldiers. Like the British militia, they, if one of them goes down, that's kind of how they were trained as soldiers.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that's how they were trained, because they thought that if they moved out of line, it was a sign of thought it would be a sign of cowardice and a sign of weakness. Plus, I mean, they were still under a system. It was basically like chess. It was pretty much like even the beginning of the Battle of Lexington, when the British troops move up, it's like, oh, the redcoats are coming up. And what it is like they have to wait for them to come up, they have to wait for the pieces to come up and, set themselves up before they can do anything. And that was the style of warfare for like 100, 200 years. And then all of a sudden with the American Revolution, we come in like, oh, they're just like, oh, bunch of troops are moving in. Boom, boom. And we just take them out one by one. And the British are like, wait, did you hear that? Like, what's going on? I mean, that's what happened. It's like, it's this whole style of warfare, and they just weren't accustomed to.
They didn't lose to decency.
They lost to strategy.
And just that one line, I'm just like, there's so many things wrong with this. If you had any other person in this film say that, that would be fine. Because that would be arrogance, but it would still be an opinion of the opposing side. Like, say you have Johnny Tremain say that. They lost to basic human decency. Or you have Otis say that. Not the British.
But I think even if Johnny Tremain were to say that, I think the movie would have taken a nosedive and be like, yeah, that kind of bottomed it right there.
Yeah. This film had me going through like a roller coaster of emotions. Like, it started off and it starts off really weird too. A lot of these early films, they have cold openings, and I was trying to figure out what was going on and who was the main character until Johnny Tremain shows up like 5 minutes in.
Yeah.
But so you're with Johnny Tremain, and then you see a lot of the stuff he goes through, and you're partly bored because nothing is really happening, and you're laughing at what's going on. And then you hit this point, and you're like, this film is serious? Is this film trying to be serious? And I start seeing the potential of the film. And then you get to that end, and it just nosedives. It's like climbing a mountain and then jumping off a cliff at the end.
It's like we know the history now. Like, we know like what happened, with the American Revolution, and you look back and you watch this movie from 60 years ago, and you look at it and you're just like, yeah, that's not what happened.
Mm-hmm. And back when we talked about Saving Mr. Banks, I brought up the idea of propaganda. Now, again, most of this film is not propaganda because we have historical records.
Yeah. But
that end, that is propaganda.
Yeah, that was a little bit of propaganda in there. Although it did kind of feel like they were like plugging in with the whole, like I said, I must have said this a bunch of times, the whole liberty good, tyranny bad, that kind of propaganda. But it's more like from a historical context, and from that, I mean, I wouldn't call it propaganda. That's more of a theme, but yeah, that last line at the end, that was straight up propaganda.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, normally I wouldn't say that about a Disney film, and I wanted to like that near the end.
Oh, I think there's plenty more Disney films that were straight up propaganda. I mean, look at the World War II stuff. I mean, you don't have to go that far in, but
this film had potential. It could have been a lot better than it was. If you had put Fess Parker in as the main character.
Oh, here we go.
Seriously, Fess Parker would work in this because, for one, Davy Crockett has gone to politics. And now I know that was probably my least favorite part of Davy Crockett, but at the same time, it just makes sense for his character. But even still, I would prefer an adult over a child actor in this case. But if you absolutely have to base it on the book, spread out the chapters. If you're going to split it, make this movie twice as long and then split it into chapters and just embellish on each chapter. I've seen book adaptations by Disney be very good. Hell, Snow White is a book adaptation. That's what Disney does. This is what Disney knows. But it seems with the live-action adaptations, they don't understand how to put the book chapter structure to film. With Dumbo, you can clearly see how things go, and it's well-paced. With this book, it just doesn't work.
No, and I think and it's funny that you mentioned Davy Crockett, because structurally that's kind of what it wants to be. And I don't know if Fess Parker would be good as Johnny Tremain, like an older Johnny Tremain, like 30, 40-year-old Johnny Tremain.
I'm gonna punch all you redcoats in the face like I did with Indians back in the war. I'm gonna squint at you and I'm gonna be like, I wrestled a bear once.
I'll give a licking to them redcoats.
See, that would be hilarious and good. This is hilarious and bad.
And he's still an apprentice, like Fess Parker, and he's still an apprentice. Trying to become a silversmith. And
that's another thing that really I thought would come back but didn't. The way this film starts out, Johnny Tremain is an apprentice to a silversmith, and they say he's really, really good. Like, his craftsmanship is good, and the only thing that he got wrong before was he didn't really compensate for the angles, but his craftsmanship is brilliant, they keep saying. And then after he burns his hand, never brought up again, even after they fix his hand.
Well, by the time they fixed his hand, he was already with the Sons of Liberty, so that's that was all in the past. So they can't.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think it would be interesting what if after they fix his hand, he set up a front, like he started his own silversmithing shop, produced his own goods, and used it as a way to communicate with the other Sons of Liberty.
Oh, maybe. I don't know if you could. I mean, I guess you could use the silver to make something I mean,
they used a newspaper delivery as a front to help the Sons of Liberty out. When he went to collect the money for the newspaper delivery, he was giving them secret codes. Mm-hmm. Instead of him risking himself by going around to everyone else's location and giving away their locations, set up a secret shop. Set up a shop that people can go in. It's a silversmith shop. It would be, nobody would notice that it was a front for anything, and everyone can just walk into it. You can say the code words, exchange funds, do that, and you wouldn't have as much risk.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, yeah, I know they were using the newspaper the newspaper printing place as a front, but when you think about it, that does make sense because you're sending the word out to people, and what better place to do it is at a printing press. But speaking of things that they don't mention again, there's a scene where he still has his hand burnt, like he hasn't got his hand fixed yet, but he goes over with Rab, and he's trying to help out this one horse that they have, and this horse is always,
God, this scene.
Yeah, the horse is always spooked by everything. So Johnny volunteers to go up, to say, I can take care of this horse. I only need one hand to ride. And Rab's but sometimes you need two hands to ride with this kind of horse. So they go out with the horse, and he's riding, and he's falling off 3 or 4 times, and he finally gets a hold of the horse, and it's I'm all right, so this guy can ride a horse. So, and it's never brought up again. It's Johnny, we I know you want to help, but we need you to stay here, even though despite the fact that you know how to ride a horse.
Yeah, he has a horse, never brought up again. You don't see him care for it. You don't see him they could have used him as a Paul Revere type figure or whatever, giving out messages on horseback. But the funniest thing about that, even with the fact that they don't bring up the horse ever again, the falling off the horse. He throws himself off the horse. He literally, Just look at this clip.
that you had enough?
Just a little bit longer.
He isn't falling off the horse. He is a horrible stuntman, and he throws himself off that horse because the horse is not bucking. It is not doing anything that would make you fall off it. And there's nothing that he does differently in the third time around when he stays on the horse. This is so bad, it's awesome. We need to give a stamp of so bad it's awesome right here.
Yes. Just stick it up there.
So, like, scenes like that is what made me laugh constantly through the film, because I'm just like, Disney, I love you.
When you think you're doing the right thing, and you know you have good intentions, but yeah, it's just you're kind of embarrassing yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
And a perfect example of that is when, in the beginning of the scene with Mr. Light's little steward, the little black...
Oh, God. Oh, God.
Oh, Master Tremain! Can I take your bag, sir?
Like I said, we've gone back to Song of the South territory, and yeah, it's kind of insensitive.
Now, Song of the South, I can kind of understand.
Yes.
You know, it was in a very different time, and these were people who grew up on a plantation. They talk in a very particular way. I didn't find Song of the South racist.
No,
it was actually pretty boring.
Yeah, that's what actually a lot of people said. I mean, I've seen it. It's kind of boring up until you get to the animated bits, but it's pretty much what you come to see, mostly for the animated stuff.
Song of the South was an important part of Disney history. So Dear to My Heart was boring, so, you know, I don't even know if there was racist stuff in there. But here is where I can't really defend Disney, because of the way this boy talks and the way he dresses, and just, that's racist, Disney.
Yeah, plus, yeah, but, I mean, yeah, I know it's colonial America, but also,
in colonial America, you wouldn't have a young black steward announcing a rich white guy around. He would probably still be working for him in a much worse job, because this guy has nice clothes. The boy has nice clothes. That wouldn't happen in colonial America.
Yeah, possibly, but it would be very rare, though. I mean, depending on how rich the guy is, and judging by Mr. Light, he's incredibly rich. He's very, very, very rich, because he's a merchant, and he was planning to buy the tea at the auction to sell it off, you know, to make money off of it, of course, because...
Yes, quite.
Well, he's also Sebastian Cabot, so, yeah.
But this guy is using a young black boy to announce his presence wherever he goes, and as a doorman. And as much as in the previous films it's been a product of the times, Disney here is not sensitive enough to the situation he's put himself in. I mean, I personally don't know much about Walt Disney. I have heard that he was an outspoken anti-Semite and a racist, but I don't know too much about that, and I don't know whether it's confirmed or denied or whatnot. But you have to take a look at this and think of the position that you put yourself in, Disney.
Like, I know it's not intentional, but it's one of those things where it's like, oh, yeah, that thing existed.
And the fact that Disney disowned Song of the South, which wasn't that racist, and I saw trailers for this film. I mean, in my search for this film and for trailers for Westward Ho to put in the actual video, I found a trailer for the collection of films that had Westward Ho and Johnny Tremain, and they promoted this film as a classic.
Well, it does have a bit of a legacy. For example, Walt Disney was actually so touched by the story of Johnny Tremain that not only that he made a motion picture out of it, but originally he actually had a plan to build a section of Disneyland called Liberty Street, which would be like adjacent off of Main Street, USA, that would be representing colonial Boston. Unfortunately, that project never really got off the ground, but however, the idea was brought back again shortly after Walt Disney's death, in which became what we now known as Liberty Square in Disney World, which is a section of the Magic Kingdom Park, which is the more expansive idea of what Walt Disney originally envisioned, but it's still there, complete with its own Liberty Tree.
He has the Hall of Presidents, he has Liberty Square. These things are worth preserving, and I do love the ideas of the stuff that he produced. I'm just, wondering if he oversaw the production of the live-action films.
From what I understand with the live-action films with Walt Disney, I remember watching a documentary on the early Disney of Walt Disney and his life, and the early productions that Walt Disney did. He was heavily invested with the animated stuff. The animated stuff was his thing because he was an animator, and he created Mickey Mouse, and he was heavily involved with the animation stuff. That was his big thing. The live action stuff was one of those things where he wanted to be involved in it because he knew it was an important, essential part of Disney in order to keep Disney relevant as a movie-making company. But he felt like he didn't really need to be directly involved in it. He passed it on to other people, and even other people were like, wait, are you sure you want to do this? Like, you sure you don't want to be involved? But Walt's like, no, I have faith in you guys. Just be like the animation stuff. Just run it like that, and you'll be fine. And for the most part, and I understand from the early stuff, that's what happened, and it worked. And now, whether or not he was really he'd be the one that probably would come up with the idea and let the other people, help do the stuff, with a lot of the creative aspect, with the writing, with the writing and the directing, and the production design and all that. I don't think Walt was directly involved. I mean, there may be some things he was more directly involved in others. I think he had some things with it, because I remember watching the Johnny Tremain DVD where they had the thing where they do because back when Walt had the whole thing where he'd be on television telling about his latest movie or something, we did this, and how he was involved with it, and he liked the idea of the story. He thought that it had a lot of movie potential, and he was just so touched by it, and he was very big on the story of America and how it and how it became to be, and a lot of the history stuff. I think he was more involved with the history stuff, but not with as far as the other live action, that's direct. He wasn't direct involved. He may come up with the idea, but someone else would carry along with it. But depending on what the project is, he may be involved. He may not be involved. Which does say a lot in going forward in what the company does later on. With them having all these different properties in which they don't necessarily have to be directly involved with each one, as long as there's a group of people that know what they're doing and know what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of telling to me in a couple of different things. That does, if Disney wasn't heavily involved in the production of this film, I can see how it turned out the way it did, because, Disney had one vision for it, and the director had to make stuff up as he went along, because, from what I see in the book, not too much happens. Also, the young black boy as a steward, that may have been something that the director let slip through and Disney didn't catch because he wasn't working on the project. So, at the end of the day, I have a giant question mark on whether I can blame the Disney Corporation or Walt Disney himself or the director of this film for that, racist depiction.
But then again, back in that time when the film was made, I mean, this was still the late 50s. This was still a time where some things that we see now as racist, like back then when that was shot, that was filmed, when that was shown in theaters, that was kind of the norm. That was part of the norm. That was what was going on. That was what was going on. That was still somewhat considered acceptable. So from that standpoint, and looking back on it, yes, it is considered racist, but at the time, why wasn't it caught? Simply because, well, it was still kind of the norm. I mean, it wouldn't be another couple of years yet, at least another 10 years or so, because this is we're talking 57, 58 at this point, and civil rights hasn't come in yet. So at the time, it didn't really bother anybody, and stuff like that. Not just in this film, but in other films, were able to get away with it.
And it is a very small part of the film. I mean, he's only in 2 very, very short scenes. He's not seen from after that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, at the same time, it is a product of its times, and, that may actually be considered progressive for the time period, having a child like that in a film role.
Yeah, I guess.
It's really hard to say.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the things that we don't consider progressive, that we consider very, take the feminist movement, for example. There are many things that today, 10 years ago, thought progressive, but today we look at them and we're just really? You thought this was progressive as a role? And it just, times have a very big change going forward. The way things change in history and the way we view certain events is definitely very different across the years.
Yes. And that's the thing with a lot of the history stuff is different, and especially when we get, it's funny, especially when we get to later on, when we get to Remember the Titans, when we talk about how racism was defined within that time period, because even though it's a sports film, but it does a pretty good job of what was going on during that time. I mean, with this film, the history is a little distorted, and yes, it's also a product of its time. But later on, when we get to the later Disney films, especially with the later historical stuff, they actually do get better. They actually do get better in terms of in terms of historical accuracy and being able to capture the of what was going on at that time, that moment in time of what was going on.
Yeah, and you brought up a very good thing with Remember the Titans. Remember the Titans is one of my favorite Disney films of all time. It is, while it is a football sports film, it is basically about the civil rights movement and how for the first time they integrate a black and a white school. And this team has to come together, and it's brilliant in how it depicts how things were at the time. And then I see people posting on message boards about how the film is racist. And I'm sorry, but no. There's a difference between showcasing what happened in a time period and being racist. For example, the clip that we keep showing about the young boy, that I consider to be racist because I don't think people back then would be treated in that particular way. And how gung-ho this boy is about everything, I don't feel is racially sensitive. I think it is more propaganda than anything. With Remember the Titans, the animosity towards black people is historically accurate.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to when we get to Remember the Titans.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's more. I think we've said more than enough on that particular thing. Even though it's such a small, little aspect of the movie, it's one of those things where it's just yeah. It's just like holy crap! It comes back again, and it's just rushes all these things. It's like, oh, how did Disney let this slip away? But it is what it is.
It's a very small part of a film, and honestly, I think people do too much picking apart of very small parts of Disney films, in any case, anyway. People who don't like Disney or Disney films and their hatred of it because he's racist or his films are racist and propaganda, you can feel what you want, but at the end of the day, that's not the majority of this film, and that's not what this film is. This film is all over the place. It's trying to be historically accurate, and it's trying to tell a very powerful story, and at the same time, there are so many elements that make it so bad it's good. Again, I compared this to The Room when I tweeted about it, because The Room was trying to do something deep and serious and ended up turning into something completely different. And, I think this film represents Disney's The Room. It was trying to do something very deep and trying to do something very sincere and ended up tearing you apart.
Well, of course. Well, my argument is that, you can't really compare anything to The Room because The Room is a movie that's in a class by itself. But I mean, I wouldn't go that far. But I mean, the movie is trying to do something. It is trying to be serious. It is trying to be serious with it. It does come off very campy. To me, I'm used to campiness, but because there's campy but good, and then there's campy but bad. This is kind of one of those campy but good. Like it's a movie that has good intentions in there, but it's just comes off kind of silly. I mean, there's that one scene where it has that really nice serious moment where they talk about what this war is ultimately going to be about. But the rest of the film is just kind of silly, and it wants to be all about fighting against tyranny and liberty for all. But it's just the way it presents itself is just kind of, well, silly.
Now, I studied camp in school, and I'm not averse to camp. I like camp. The Lego Movie is camp. And
I think the Lego Movie is a lot more than just camp, but that's beside the point.
Well, the depiction of Batman is more what I'm referring to.
Okay.
Yeah, he like the Adam West Batman. I love camp. I love that. And in this film, it does have that camp element to it. I didn't really recognize it until I, sat down and thought about it, but this is a form of camp. You said campy but good. I'm going to go with campy but middle of the road. It's not bad camp, but the principle of camp tends to be taking something so serious that is intended for comedy. This was never intended to be comical. This was intended to be 100% a serious story. And so it's not purposeful camp. And that harms it a little bit, I think. Camp is better when, in a film like Airplane, it's intended to be so serious that it's funny. That's where the humor comes from. Here, the humor comes from a lot of the things that shouldn't be funny, but are hilarious. Again, throwing himself off the horse.
But it still makes it enjoyable to watch, nonetheless.
Yes. I entered this saying this is probably one of the worst Disney films I saw of the classic era. And I do stand by that, but it's one of the ones where instead of, being boring like So Dear to My Heart, and it does have boring sections, instead of being irritating like Cinderella 2, instead of I Want to Kill You, Reluctant Dragon, instead of all those things, it's a package that doesn't work, and yet it works at the same time.
Yes. And that's what I think I like. That's kind of what I like about it. But at the same time, it just hasn't aged very well.
I don't think I would see it again for a while, but if I got drunk and I saw it with a group of friends, I would totally do that. Like, this is the type of film that you would see with a group of your friends. You point out all the problems with it, you laugh, and then you continue on. That's this film in a nutshell. It's not so bad it angers me. It's so bad that it flips upon itself, and it makes me want to study why it is the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the same reaction I had with this, is that, because I was watching it, and I thought, all right, this movie, it doesn't seem too bad. I mean, my roommate is going over saying, oh my god, this movie's so god-awful. And I'm just like, really? Because I'm watching, I'm like, all right, and then I hear you reading your tweets on Twitter saying that, oh my god, this is like Disney's The Room. And I'm just like, what is everyone talking about? So I pop in the movie a second time. I'm watching it. I'm just like, okay, I can see its flaws, but yet, I mean, it's not particularly really bad. I've seen much worse movies, but I mean, I've seen bad movies that are still entertaining, and this one is still entertaining to a degree. Mm-hmm. But overall, I mean, if you still want to, if you're American Revolutionary War buff, you're probably not seen this movie. It's definitely worth checking out. I mean, especially because they do do a good job with the historical accuracy as far as what happened with the Boston Tea Party and with the shot heard round the world. I like the way that they presented it, even though with the Boston Tea Party just seemed kind of, well, casual.
I don't know how you make the Boston Tea Party boring, but with that insertion of music and just them nonchalantly throwing stuff overboard, like they weren't gung-ho about it, they were just doing it. And I'm just like, I played Assassin's Creed 3. I know it can be more interesting than this.
Well, I didn't want to say anything, but, well, yeah, it would have been more interesting if, you know, if Connor came in and just kind of just started throwing the crew overboard and then throwing over the things of tea. But then again, with the shot heard round the world, maybe Connor did have a thing in that.
Dun, dun, dun. So, that's final thoughts on the film.
I still enjoyed it. Because, you know, I like history, and I mean especially American Revolution, and with this film in particular, I mean, this film has not really aged very well, especially since I've seen other American Revolutionary War movies that do, I think, a much better job of capturing the American Revolution. But with this film, I see what it's trying to do, and it does do some things right, historically speaking, but there are just moments in there where especially with some of the action bits, where it's just like, oh, yeah, this is kind of silly, but I mean, yes, it's not intended, but still somewhat enjoyable. It's worth a rental.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, it's worse than a lot of the films me and Kat previously covered in terms of presentation. Objectively, it's worse. But the elements that work really well, and the elements that don't work are so hilarious that I find myself cracking up just thinking about the stuff that happened. So, at the end of the day, I think Disney fans should watch it. I mean, it's more interesting than So Dear to My Heart. It's better than a Disney sequel because it's its own individual story. And like I said, The Reluctant Dragon only pissed me off because of, one very small character. This film, while presented worse than a lot of the ones that we've covered, just ends up being better at the same time. It's so weird. It's a dichotomy, and I think you owe it to yourself to at least see it once, just to see what I'm talking about. Johnny Tremain. I saw this on a badly ripped stream from a VHS. I have a better copy that I'm using in this video right now. But so that may have impacted my opinion on the film a little bit.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Mm-hmm. Overall, though, I think you should give it a look. This gets my camp stamp of approval.
I concur.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Make that 2 stamps.
2 stamps. Okay. Next time, we will delve into the world of Old Yeller. And I know for a fact that this is a popular film and has been well received. So, I've never seen it. I can't wait for next time. I'm Zenith Rule, and this is my friend Y2Staller, and we will see you next time.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you for watching The Media Meltdown. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome videos. And if you like what you see, show your support on the Patreon page at patreon.com/Media Meltdown. See you all next time on The Media Meltdown.